We dare you. The next time you go to the dentist to get a cavity filled or a tooth pulled, tell the dentist that you don't want them to use any anesthetic or numbing agent. None at all. We'd be willing to take bets that you won't and wouldn't. But of course, we wouldn't either. At A Day in History, we like writing about painful practices, not experiencing them ourselves. Welcome to the interesting and painful history of anesthesia. Before we get started with the video, we want to take a moment to tell you more about today's sponsor, G2A.com. Looking for a discounted Amazon gift card or an Uber Eats coupon? Then head to G2A.com, one of the biggest and greatest online marketplaces for gift cards, software, and gaming-related items. If you're looking for awesome games or you're after a distinctive Christmas present, G2A has got you covered. They are currently running a special Christmas offer in which they have huge bargains that change every day with certain items up to 80% off. You definitely don't want to miss this, so check it out by clicking the link in the description. Though wartime surgery remained largely the same until after the US Civil War, it is usually movies about that conflict in which we see the nature of combat surgery before the understanding and acceptance of germ theory and widespread use of anesthesia. Usually, the hero of the movie is carried into a blood-stained canvas tent with doctors and orderlies wearing leather aprons. These aprons were water, or rather blood-proof, and in Civil War hospitals, there was an awful lot of blood. To give you an idea, at the Battle of Franklin, Tennessee in 1864, a room in the private Carnton House was used as an operating room. Before the room was restored a few years ago, historians and scientists took the kind of black light you see on the TV show Crime Scene Investigations, CSI, into the room. They found, 150 years after the battle, signs of horror. Blood had coated the walls and even the room's high ceilings. That's not surprising considering most of the operations performed there were amputations. The wounded of both sides brought into Carnton House did not get anything to kill the pain. Perhaps the first few men got a shot of whiskey, but most of those still conscious had to make do with either biting down on a stick or mini-ball bullet in a vain attempt to try to take their mind off the pain and to prevent them from biting through their tongue when the surgeon began to saw their arms or legs off. Those who survived were either crudely stitched up or had their wounds cauterized with a hot iron to try and stop the massive bleeding. 1,800 years and more before that, a trepanning procedure was often used to lessen pressure on the brain caused by blunt force trauma or some illnesses. It was likely used to cure some mental diseases as well. Today, surgeons sometimes do the procedure to reduce pressure on or swelling of the brain. But the operation is much more successful, clean, and pain-free. You see, trepanning is the drilling or cutting of a hole in the skull. Archaeologists have found countless ancient skulls worldwide that show signs of trepanning. In the popular TV series Rome, Titus Pullo, one of the main characters, is injured in a bar fight and has pieces of pottery inside his head and swelling on the brain. A Greek surgeon and his aide are summoned, and they use a hand-powered drill with a circular serrated edge to cut a hole in Pullo's skull. Eventually, the gap is filled with a bronze plate, evidence of which has also been found and described in ancient writings. When the surgeon takes a small hammer and taps the plate into place, the tough Roman soldier passes out, luckily for him. As you can imagine, the earliest anesthetics were found in the natural world. It's interesting to think about how people first discovered the anesthetic qualities of certain plants. It would be fun to think that one guy, about 3,000 years ago, looked at an opium poppy and thought, let's lick the stuff coming out and see what happens. But most likely what happened is that over eons, knowledge was passed down from generation to generation until it became common knowledge. People knew that certain types of plants, especially the opium poppy, which grew plentifully in parts of the Middle East, had something about them that both resulted in euphoria and deadened pain. The first recorded depiction of the opium poppy comes from around 4000 BCE, some 6,000 years ago. The flower is depicted on several Sumerian artifacts found in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. We don't know if the Sumerians used opium as a painkiller or recreational drug, but many of the cultures that came after the Sumerians used it for both, and there was likely an element of communing with the gods to taking it as well. We know that the ancient Egyptian culture used opium as a pain reliever, as did the Romans and many cultures in India and China at the time. Another group of Middle Eastern people, the Assyrians, used a technique to prevent people from suffering during quick surgeries like circumcision or cataract surgery, and this one didn't involve any substances at all. They knocked people out. Unfortunately, it's not as dramatic as you might think. They didn't punch their patients, but knowledgeable physicians would apply quick but heavy pressure to the carotid artery of the neck, which carries oxygenated blood to the brain and produced unconsciousness. The coordination between the person pressing on the neck and the one holding the knife must have been impressive. There have been scenes in movies which depict cowboys or others knocking someone out before an operation if there was no booze around. But in reality, this happened pretty infrequently. Ask any boxer. When you're really trying to knock someone out, it's more difficult than if you just let go and let it happen. That and the fact that some people are really hard to knock out, and the last thing a surgeon needs is someone wailing on their patients before surgery. Cannabis, wolfsbane, and mandrake sound like the name of three witches in a bad comedy. But like opium, these three plants have been used to various degrees to lessen or deaden pain for centuries. We know that around 600 BCE, the Indian physician Sushruta used cannabis smoke to help people relax before an operation and to deaden pain. We know this because Sushruta wrote down his thoughts about the body, surgery, medicine, and much else. Sushruta's thoughts are the foundation of the practice of Ayurveda, which means life in Sanskrit. Many people today think of Ayurvedic medicine as natural or homeopathic medicine today, though its roots, as you can see, are ancient. Around the same time, physicians were using wolfsbane, a species of the aconitum family of plants. Wolfsbane is also referred to as aconitum and was used throughout India and China as a sedative and for sedation during surgery. The first written mention of the word anesthesia comes from the Greek philosopher Plato and means a lack of feeling, perception, and lack of sensation. 3 centuries after Plato, we have the account of Dioscorides, a Greek surgeon serving in the Roman army in 64 AD, who describes the use of mandrake, a flowering plant which is common in southern Europe. Dioscorides took the flowers of mandrake and boiled them in wine to cause the insensibility of those who are to be cut or cauterized. In China, about 100 years later, a surgeon named Hua Tao combined wine and cannabis in a mixture called mafeisan or cannabis biopowder to kill pain. I'll take some. Mandrake root can also be used as a deadly poison and was known to have been used for just that purpose in ancient Rome, which brings us to another problem. Though history proves that medical knowledge and beliefs change radically over time, and perhaps anesthesiologists 200 years from now might think that anesthesiology today is primitive and full of errors, know quite a bit more than Hua Tao, Sushruta, and the ancient Greek father of medicine, Hippocrates. While the ancients knew that opium could be addictive and that you didn't administer an adult dose of medicine to a child, there were likely some mistakes made that would never be made today. Firstly, anesthetics of all kinds are measured and created very carefully down to the microgram or smaller. What's more, we know that a number of factors affect how quickly and for how long a person might be under during surgery. Age, size, medical history, stress, and much else are taken into account before surgery even begins. And, of course, the common questions: are you allergic to any medicines, or have you had an adverse reaction to anesthesia before? Mistakes happen occasionally, but imagine what must have happened so long ago. In the movies, once again, usually westerns and movies about the Civil War, for a person to be given a drink or an entire bottle before a bullet is pulled out or a limb is removed was common. Mostly, alcohol, when it was used, was done so to calm a person down, or perhaps give them a bit of courage before the fun began. If a person was small or could hold their liquor, maybe they passed out and didn't feel a thing. But if a person drank too much or passed out after doing so, the combination of trauma, loss of blood, a slow heart rate, and lowered blood pressure had a better chance of killing the patient than without. That's one big reason why doctors will tell you not to drink for at least 24 hours before surgery. Today, a patient is usually given anesthesia throughout major surgery. As you know, this is usually done with the use of intravenous needles, though sometimes, as in the case of nitrous oxide at the dentist, a gaseous painkiller is administered. This was also common in the age of ether and chloroform, two forms of anesthesia we will tell you about in a moment. Interestingly, both Roman and Arabic cultures AD used a form of anesthetic mask during surgery in order to ensure the patient didn't wake up during a procedure or was sufficiently relaxed while awake. This is what is called a soporific sponge. Soporific means sleep-bearing, and that's exactly what happened. Many of the same herbs just described to you, opium, wolfsbane, mandrake, and a couple of others like henbane and hemlock, a favorite of witches everywhere, which were also deadly if misused, would be put on or in a sponge, perhaps with alcohol, in order to produce a stronger vapor, and were fastened to the face during surgery. More was added as needed. Lastly, it's known that the Incan shamans, like many of their descendants today, chewed cocoa leaves, the plant from which cocaine is made. They would chew the leaves into a mush and then drip the numbing saliva into wounds. You likely know that until the early 1920s, cocaine was legal in many places in the USA and was widely used by dentists as a numbing agent. What you may not know is that in the years between the end of World War II and 1922, there was a cocaine epidemic in the US which rivaled that of the 1980s. As you might imagine, most people in ancient Rome, Greece, Egypt, and other places did not have access to a physician. They might have a local who was somewhat skilled and knew about some local plants, but a major wound or surgery was deadly enough for the rich, who had access to the best money could buy. In the countryside, most people were on their own, and without treatment, the gods and rituals were the only ones who might help. It's believed by many historians that the priestess of the famous Oracle of Delphi in ancient Greece were actually under the influence of the gas ethylene, which formed naturally in the seismic fault which ran through the oracle area. The popular anesthetic ether, which you also sometimes see being given in movies about the 1800s, is a synthesized version of ethylene, diethyl ether, which is the liquefied form and which emits a sedative gas. The first use of ether was actually on animals. The famous Swiss physician Paracelsus used it to sedate and knock out animals in the 1500s. However, it wasn't until 1846 that ether was used in a modern operation by scientist William T.G. Morton and surgeon John Collins Warren at Massachusetts General Hospital. Among anesthesiologists, that day, October 16, 1846, is known as Ether Day and is considered the founding date of modern anesthesiology. A related anesthetic, the chemical compound chloroform, became popular at about the same time and was independently discovered in the USA, Germany, and France. Chloroform is the liquefied form of chlorinated lime and ether. Chloroform was really popular in movies for a while, though it was mostly used by kidnappers or other bad guys to sneak up from behind an unsuspecting victim with a cloth soaked in the substance to knock them out cold and take them away. Chloroform was all the rage for a time, but its side effects, at least the ones known at the time, were serious enough for the substance to be banned in the medical community after only a decade or so of use. Today, opium derivatives such as morphine and codeine are used as post-operative painkillers and to dull the pain of incurable diseases such as cancer. As you likely know, the United States in particular has been suffering an epidemic of opioid abuse and has put serious restrictions on the use of these drugs. In most modern facilities today, people undergoing surgery of any kind are given a whole variety of sedatives, muscle relaxants, and anesthetics before surgery. In the vast majority of cases, the patient remembers being told they were being sedated a bit before being taken into the operating room and then waking up with no memory of the procedure today. We hope you enjoyed this painful yet sedate lesson on the history of anesthesia. Now, the next time you suffer a cannonball wound, try biting a stick and taking a shot of whiskey. Might take the edge off. Just kidding. Don't do that if you suffer a cannonball wound. Please like and subscribe. Thank you.